New York City, the city that never sleeps. A place of towering steel and endless streets where millions of stories intertwine every single day. But New York is not just a city made of concrete and glass. It is a psychological landscape, an evolving experiment in how urban design shapes the minds, the habits, and the emotions of those who live here. This is the story of New York's urban evolution, a story of grids and skyscrapers, of parks and subways, of renewal, decline, resilience, and rebirth. A story of how the city shaped its people, and how its people, in turn, reshaped the city. In 1811, city planners unveiled a radical vision, the Commissioner's Plan. The idea was bold, almost utopian, to carve up the wild, uneven landscape of Manhattan into an orderly grid of 12 long avenues and more than 150 cross streets, a map of predictability, geometry, and efficiency. For the immigrants and merchants arriving at the time, this grid offered clarity. It was a navigational tool in an unfamiliar world. You didn't need to know a neighborhood deeply to find your way. You just needed an address, and the grid would take you there. But the grid was more than convenience. It created a psychology of blocks. New Yorkers learned to measure distance not in miles but in streets and avenues. Life became modular, compartmentalized. The city felt infinite, yet structured. And while it gave freedom of movement, it also gave monotony, an endless march of right angles, a rhythm that shaped how New Yorkers saw their environment and themselves. As the 19th century closed, another transformation began. The invention of steel-frame construction and the safety elevator made the impossible possible, building not just across the ground but up into the sky. The skyscraper was born. The Flatiron Building, the Woolworth, the Chrysler, and finally, the Empire State Building. Each new tower pushed the horizon higher, and each one told the world, this is a city of ambition. For the people of New York, skyscrapers created new emotions. They inspired awe. They embodied the American dream, but they also created feelings of smallness. To live in New York was to live dwarfed by giants of steel. Inside the towers, life condensed. Thousands of workers shared vertical stacks of offices. Elevators compressed human interaction into moments of silence or awkward glances. The very idea of community shifted, from neighborhood stoops to lobbies, from street corners to corridors. Height reshaped the way New Yorkers interacted with each other and with the city itself. But as the city grew taller and denser, it also grew harsher. Crowds, noise, and stress became part of daily life. In response, a visionary named Frederick Law Olmsted imagined something radical, a grand park at the heart of Manhattan. Central Park was not just green space, it was medicine, a psychological refuge designed to soothe the minds of industrial workers and exhausted immigrants. Its winding paths rejected the rigidity of the grid. Its meadows and lakes invited pause, reflection, and leisure. Here, New Yorkers rediscovered nature and themselves. The park equalized. Wealthy elites and working-class families walked the same paths, breathed the same air. It was a social experiment as much as an urban one, and psychologically, it became essential, a way for residents to escape without leaving, to rest without slowing down the pulse of the city. By the late 19th century, millions of immigrants arrived from Europe and beyond. They crowded into tenement houses on the Lower East Side and other neighborhoods. These buildings were cramped, dark, and poorly ventilated. Entire families lived in single rooms. Privacy was almost non-existent. The conditions were brutal, but they forged something unique, a culture of resilience, of tight-knit community. Children played on stoops. Fire escapes became living rooms. The street was an extension of the home. Out of this hardship came solidarity. Yet the psychological toll was heavy. Overcrowding bred stress and disease. A lack of personal space reshaped social norms. But the tenements also planted the seeds of New York's identity. Tough, adaptable, and deeply communal. A city of neighborhoods that carried the marks of every wave of immigrants. In 1904, another revolution, the subway. Suddenly, distance collapsed. What once took hours on foot or carriage could now be crossed in minutes underground. The subway changed New York from a collection of neighborhoods into a single living organism. It synchronized the city's heartbeat. People lived by timetables, learned to rush, to squeeze into crowded cars, to endure discomfort for the promise of speed. By the mid-20th century, New York faced a new kind of transformation. Under the influence of master builder Robert Moses, highways, bridges, and massive housing projects reshaped the city. Whole neighborhoods were bulldozed in the name of progress. Communities were displaced. The city of stoops and streets was cut apart by expressways. For many residents, this was psychological trauma. The destruction of familiar streets meant the destruction of identity and belonging. High-rise housing projects isolated families, breaking the fabric of community. Yet New Yorkers resisted. Jane Jacobs, a writer and activist, led a grassroots movement to protect neighborhoods like Greenwich Village. She argued that streets, small businesses, and the presence of people were what made a city thrive. Her fight highlighted a deep truth. Cities are not just physical, they are emotional ecosystems. The 1970s brought crisis. Economic collapse, rising crime, and near bankruptcy pushed New York to the edge. Buildings burned. Subways were covered in graffiti. Many who could afford it fled to the suburbs, but those who stayed adapted. They built resilience out of necessity. From the ruins came creativity. Hip-hop was born in the Bronx. Graffiti art turned subway cars into rolling galleries. Punk rock filled downtown basements. Psychologically, the city hardened. New Yorkers became defined by grit, toughness, and pride in surviving what outsiders called chaos. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, New York reinvented itself again. Crime fell. Investment poured in. Neighborhoods once written off as dangerous became desirable. Glass towers rose in Brooklyn. Luxury apartments replaced factories and warehouses. But with renewal came displacement. Rents soared. Longtime residents were pushed out. The psychological impact was profound. On one side, optimism, opportunity, and pride in the city's global power. On the other, anxiety, resentment, and the feeling of being a stranger in one's own neighborhood. New York became a city of contradictions, home to immense wealth and deep inequality, a place of limitless opportunity and constant precarity. Yet its diversity, its energy, and its culture of reinvention remained intact. So what is New York truly? It is not just a collection of buildings, streets, and parks. It is a living psychology. The grid gave it order. Skyscrapers gave it ambition. Parks gave it breath. Tenements gave it resilience. Subways gave it speed. Renewal and crisis gave it grit. And gentrification continues to test its soul.